Tuesday mornings, we go live to our nation's capital and Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter David Fahrenthold at the Washington Post. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
First of all, you are a D.C. resident, yes? D.C. proper?
That's right. I am a D.C. resident.
Not the Maryland, not the Virginia. You're D.C.
No. That's the real place. Yes, that's right.
So there's been a lot said recently about the idea of statehood, about making Washington, D.C. the 51st state. Where, first of all, what's the momentum behind that, and are you in favor?
Well, the momentum behind it, I think, is kind of at the high water mark that it's ever been, which is not nearly high enough to get it passed. So it's just passed the House of Representatives. I don't think it has the support to overcome the filibuster in the Senate. In fact, I know it doesn't, because I think everybody recognizes this would add 2 more Democratic senators and 1 more Democratic representative. The Republicans, who make up almost half of the Senate, would not want that. So you hear some arguments about, well, D.C. shouldn't be a state because it doesn't have any farms, or D.C. shouldn't be a state because it doesn't have any factories. But really, that's it. Nobody wants to add Republicans don't want to add 2 Democratic senators.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about a star to the flag? Is it an aesthetic thing? Are people worried about throwing off the balance? Those nice 50 stars.
You laugh, but I honestly think that if we had 49 states now, and adding D.C. would get us to 50, that this would seem like a much more plausible idea. But the fact that we're at 50 now, such a good even number, and D.C. would make it 51. And you're right, the flag would look a little odd. I mean, I'm sure you could do it, but I think that's part of what makes this sound unnatural, is that we're at such a good round number now, people don't want to mess with that.
So is this purely, a political play? Is to be alliterative? Is this something that really they're just trying to get more Democrats in this close, tied up House and Senate, or are there other motives behind the idea of statehood for D.C.?
Well, there are a lot of great arguments for D.C. statehood. Look, we have more residents in D.C. than Vermont or Wyoming. Like we're bigger than some states, and yet we have no representation in the Senate, and our only representative in Congress can't vote. So, this huge amount of people is not really represented at all in the legislative branch. That said, the arguments that are going to matter to people in Congress are arguments about boosting one political party or the other. Now, there's a long tradition of that in American history. That's why we have 2 Dakotas instead of 1, because people wanted to add 2 more, but wanted 4 Republican senators instead of 2, but way back when. But given that calculation, it's going to take a strong Democratic majority in the Senate to make this a likely outcome.
Let's talk about something I didn't think we were still going to be talking about, and that is the presidential election. It looks to me like Arizona has been going ahead with this full recount, a hand recount of all their votes. Is that true?
What's happening in Arizona is strange. So Arizona obviously certified its election 10 ways to Sunday back in January and December. There's no doubt about it that Joe Biden won Arizona. But the Republican state Senate in Arizona has set up this weird recount of just Maricopa County, which is what includes Phoenix. It's a huge proportion of the state's residents. And they've hired this firm called Cyber Ninjas, which is run by a guy that has basically supported Trump's conspiracy theories last year, his false conspiracy theories about the election, and also has no experience, with any sort of election recount like this. So they've got all these people in a convention center in Phoenix, and they're looking at the ballots, shining ultraviolet light on them. It's really unclear, even to the reporters who are there, what exactly their plan is. But it does not seem like a very well-run thing. The first day, they got all the ballots, and a reporter noticed that the recounters were carrying blue pens. And you're not allowed to have blue pens around ballots because ballot readers can read blue marks. And so they had to stop it and get everybody red pens just because this reporter pointed it out. Doesn't really sort of, to me, give me a great confidence that they know what they're doing.
Sure. And something like 2 million votes hand-counted, that just seems like quite an undertaking. I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like the point of it is to raise questions about election administration, or just sort of to give credence to Trump's unfounded conspiracy theories. That seems like it's been the point of it all along. That said, I don't think a lot of people who are not already in that partisan camp are going to put much stock in the outcome of this.
Let's talk a little bit about false claims and conspiracy theories, because your colleague Glenn Kessler had the, I'm going to say, monumental task of fact-checking Donald Trump for more than 4 years, and he's still doing it with President Biden.
Alive.
He's still
Yes.
right. He made it. He pulled through, and he's still doing it with Biden, and has compared their first 100 days basically, and Joe Biden, it looks like 67 false or misleading claims, whereas Trump at this point was 511 false or misleading claims. How do you compare these 100 days?
Well, I mean, it's just night and day. I mean, part of this is that Trump spoke off the cuff much more. He tweeted for himself. He gave lots of press conferences. He spoke directly to people, the American people, much more than Joe Biden has. Biden is much more like a president before Trump, where he puts out things sort of through spokespeople or through speeches, things that are much more controlled. Mm-hmm. But also Trump just lied. And lying was a way of doing business for him and then a way of doing politics. It was a way of trying to reshape the world to fit what he wanted the world to be. Just that was his approach to life. And if you don't like the reality, just lie about it enough and people might believe it. Biden is not like that. For whatever else Biden's flaws might be, he doesn't approach the truth that way. So I think it's not just that Trump spoke more, it's that Trump saw lying as not just an acceptable thing to do, but sort of a main part of his political strategy.
Yeah, a strategy. So how have things at the Post changed, or have they? Since Joe Biden has become president?
Well, it's obviously a very different schedule, right? You never have to worry about, tweets at 2:00 in the morning changing the course of U.S. policy. So it's a return to the normal schedule in that way. That, we cover news all around the world, and so there's news that breaks in India and China in the middle of the night our time. But the U.S. president tweeting, never makes news in the middle of the night anymore. Mm-hmm. That said, I think it's going to be a much different way of covering politics, in that we're not going to cover so much what the president is doing, what he is saying, but cover what's happening in Congress, what's happening in the departments. It's going to be much more of a focus on the implementation of policies, because unlike under Trump, the policies won't change every 10 minutes. So, you'll be able to see ideas sort of carried through to their ends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Speaking of ideas, and while I have you, I've heard the idea that President Biden is going to take away my meats. That part of his plan is to get people to stop eating red meat. Now that doesn't quite track with me. What do you say about that?
That's completely imaginary, and I think that's a really interesting view into what the Republicans struggle to find something that Biden is doing wrong and to build opposition to Biden. Now that the border has kind of faded as an issue, the last two things that have come up, that have been sort of adopted by Republican office holders as like criticisms of Biden, are just completely imaginary. One of them is this idea that Biden is going to ban meat consumption or make people only eat 4 pounds of meat a year. Fox News said that based on some University of Michigan study from 2020, had nothing to do with Biden's actual policy. But all these Republican people talked about it. And then lately there's been this conspiracy theory that Biden is giving copies of Hunter Biden's book to all newly arriving immigrants. So, really? I guess there is a population of people who live in a right-wing media ecosystem who will believe anything. And so that's who they're catering toward. But because it has nothing to do with what, it's all made up. It has nothing to do with what Biden's actually doing. I think that limits its power as a political strategy for everybody.
As somebody who I know, like your work and you've dedicated your life to sort of sussing out the truth about issues. Do you ever find it strange that tactic is still so effective? That the idea that there's this big, they're going to take away this, they're going to take away that. I mean, how many elections have I lived through that they're going to take away all our guns, and that hasn't happened?
I know, and it is surprising and dismaying as somebody who spends a lot of time trying to make sure that I'm getting things exactly right and not just reporting what I want to be true or think to be true. But I honestly think that's the way it's been in America forever. Because of the internet, we can see it more clearly now, but there were always a section of people who just believed conspiracy theories or believed falsehoods. And it's easier to measure that now, but it hasn't changed that much. What changed with Trump was that there was somebody running for office who was explicitly about lying to people and exploiting their willingness to believe falsehoods. We've never really seen anybody like that, at least in a long time. And we'll see. I wonder if it'll work again. But it's to me, it's surprising. I mean, it's dismaying, but it's not that surprising that exists.
Thank you so much, David. It was great talking with you. Appreciate your time. That is Pulitzer Prize winning reporter David Fahrenthold at The Washington Post.